Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk back again with you guys for another episode of what is our Arsenal news show. Join you every morning at 8 a.m. at UK time. First of all, apologies if there's any internet issues or anything like that. It's not the best connection, so I'm currently hotspotting off my phone because it's even better than the Wi-Fi is here in the place that we're staying. So apologies for that, but I'm probably going to be on a little smaller screen with the PowerPoint showing up anyway. So, hopefully it's all good and well. Thank you. And I hope you guys are good and well as well. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in, joining in. As always, do drop a like, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on so that you never miss a show. Good morning to Olu, to Sabre, to Black Shine, to Paul. Good morning to Rich. Amira, Peter, good morning to Glenn. We've got Red Star, Damien, Matt G, Jose, Johnny, Matt Tomo, Stevie, and plenty more of you guys as well. Thank you, everyone, for listening. It is very much appreciated. Let's not waste any time. I'm going to be honest, there's not loads of news this morning. The international break has not caused us to have too much to discuss, which means we might have a slightly longer Q&A section, so do stick around for part two. But let's go into today's stories. First of all, Martin Keown has been having a discussion and a chat about the idea of Arsenal signing Brentford striker Ivan Toney. He says that if we compare Ivan to Haaland, what would Haaland do in that team, Man City, because they're so strong everywhere else? Have you been able to take that player out and put them into a top team? They've played with a false nine for many years, 2 or 3 seasons, where they couldn't integrate that player who drops from a high position into the midfield to give them control that they needed. And once they secured that midfield with Gundogan, De Bruyne and Rodri, they said, okay, let's bring in that striker. It's whether Arsenal are ready for that. And Gabriel Jesus, when he's playing striker, we see him at left back and all over the pitch because he's more of a collective effort. Maybe he has to do that because in the past, the team hasn't been strong enough defensively. So it's where the team is. But I get it because Toney is a prolific goal scorer. So he's kind of voicing the feelings that I've got, if you like. He's got the feelings that I've had about Toney and what the concerns about whether or not he would fit the style, the process of what Arsenal and Arteta has kind of really been establishing in this Arsenal team. Without a doubt, he scores goals. Without a doubt, he gets a good amount of on his goal tally every single season. But it's difficult to know whether or not he would fit and whether or not Arsenal got the right system to play with that style of striker. A lot of people complain when we use Eddie Nketiah. I know that that's more to do with the player himself, but I think there's also something stylistically about Eddie Nketiah, which means that we lose the collaborative effect of what Gabriel Jesus can bring to the team. But overall, I think that, as we all know, if he was to sign for Arsenal, we'd all back it, we'd all support it, and we'd hope that he can succeed. But for now, I certainly still do have a fair amount of questions about it too. Do let me know in the chat box how the stream is looking for you guys. Just a little bit of feedback would be appreciated because I have absolutely no idea how it is coming across and if you can see me and if you can hear me all right. So do let me know throughout. Our second story and our penultimate story, only 3 things to discuss this morning. Eddie Nketiah made his debut for the England national team, the senior side, yesterday, coming on for goalscorer Ollie Watkins in a 1-0 win over Australia, which was, I think Australia made a really good account of themselves actually during the game. Plenty of opportunities. They could have scored on a couple of occasions as well. England certainly could have had a fair few more chances as well. But Eddie Nketiah coming on was the main story from an Arsenal perspective. No Declan Rice, no Aaron Ramsdale, of course, both of them on the bench. Whether or not either or both will be involved against Italy remains to be seen. I imagine Declan Rice will start that game, but Aaron Ramsdale, I doubt, will get a minute of football unless he is going to start that game against Italy. But I'd imagine it would probably be Jordan Pickford that starts that one. But yes, Eddie Nketiah made his England debut. Was energetic, was sprightly, but never really offered it never looked like he was going to score, for instance. There wasn't really the opportunity that fell to him, sadly. But as Maximir says, that locks him up for England. No, actually it doesn't, because this was a friendly. And so because it wasn't a competitive fixture, Eddie Nketiah technically still is not locked in for England. If he was to come off the bench in the game against Italy next week, that would indeed lock him into England for the rest of his career. But for the moment, he can still represent other nations that obviously relate to his heritage. For instance, I think Ghana are the other side that have had interest in bringing Eddie Nketiah into their international scene, but has so far turned that down. But if he was to play in the Italy game, he would be locked into England. But so far, still no, he's not locked into England because this was only a friendly. And our headline story of the day is that Liverpool have, according to Court Offsides writers, joined the race for Pedro Neto. As we know, Arsenal have had an interest in Pedro Neto. He's a player that Arsenal are quite keen on during the course of this transfer window that's coming up in January. But whether or not Arsenal make a move remains to be seen. I have got that question about whether or not they really need Pedro Neto. I know that depth is maybe a little bit lacking for Mohamed Salah's position, and they've had players like Shaqiri to cover that role, knowing that they wouldn't get too many minutes. But I feel as though the lack of, the amount of forwards that they've got, be it Gakpo, Nunez, Diaz, Salah, Elliott can play in a wide position as well, of course, too. It's a little bit strange that they would go for someone like Neto as well to add to the plethora of attacking options that they've got. So, yeah, I'm not quite sure whether or not that this is a move that would threaten Arsenal's interest, if indeed it has got a chance of threatening that interest. Maybe it's a long-term replacement for Salah. Maybe that's how they see it. But Neto being linked to Arsenal and Liverpool, is an interesting thread. And for any top player, Arsenal are obviously going to have competition. It's not going to be an easy route, but we've shown that we can, bat away sides like Manchester City when trying to sign a player like Declan Rice. If we can go in with enough financial muscle, maybe if they want the player enough, they'll be willing to pay what it takes to beat any other side to get him. And that is all of today's story. So we're going to move to part 2 and your questions right after this. Okay, let's jump into the chat. We're going to be around for around 10 to 15 or so more minutes. So let's go through as many of your questions in the chat as we can. I hope everything is holding up and showing okay. Just looking from your comments, it seems like, yep, it's working fine. It's perfect. All good on the stream. That's good. So the hotspot is doing its job, which is a positive. Viraj says, would you agree that we're ahead of Liverpool with regards to the player preference if terms are the same? Well, Liverpool obviously don't have Champions League football yet. They may do by next summer. So in that regard, you can say that Arsenal are a more attractive team. There's the London factor as well. And, of course, the strong evidence that Arsenal look more of a title challenger in the last season and this season than Liverpool do right now. So I suppose there's a good argument in that fact. But Liverpool always have had a really big pull for players. Jurgen Klopp obviously is a massive factor as well. Portuguese players like Diogo Jota, of course, are there. So you've got that fact. But Arsenal themselves have got their Portuguese and Portuguese-speaking contingent of Portuguese and Brazilian players. So that's also worth counting toward that. I think Neto would be a better fit for Arsenal. I think somebody like Mikel Arteta would be able to get perhaps more from the wingers. He's shown what he's been able to get from those wide players like Saka and Martinelli and Trossard and, to a lesser extent, Nelson and Smith Rowe as well. So I'm sure that Neto would have seen that and certainly would have been able to recognise what. He's also got that link to Arsenal. I think he's come out in an interview in the past and said that he's a fan of Arsenal, actually. So maybe that would work in Arsenal's favour. Dow says, Guirassy has a 20 million release clause. I know that he's a bit older, but he looks fantastic. This is Serhou Guirassy, who is at Stuttgart. He's currently got 13 goals in 7 Bundesliga games. A very, very good record so far. He was signed from Rennes in the summer. And I did a piece in Football.London the other day talking about the Bundesliga forwards that maybe Arsenal could go for those that have been talking about Boniface and Benjamin Sesko. They were also included in this piece. And I think the problem with Guirassy is obviously the age profile. He's 28 in March. And it is kind of the first season really where his numbers have exploded. And it could be the fact that it's just having a very fortunate start to the season. Then he's got an XG of about 7.2. So he's currently exceeding his XG by about just under 6, which means he's overachieving quite significantly right now. Will he be able to maintain that is the question over the course of the season. If that continues, he's on for like 30 plus goals in the Bundesliga, which would be an incredible tally. Can that be continued? I don't know. So let's wait and see whether or not he can succeed in that sense. Paul says, we seem to be the second gear so far, but will we play with more swagger after beating Manchester City when the international break finishes? I don't know whether, Paul, I mean, your question seems to indicate that your feeling is that it maybe is confidence that has been a big reason as to why Arsenal have not clicked in the way that we've maybe wanted them to. I think that there is an element of that for sure, but I think that's more related to the learning how we're evolving, playing with new personnel into a new system under Arteta this season, more so than maybe confidence of what happened at the end of last season. Sure, I think there'll be a boost from that Manchester City win, but we didn't beat Man City playing a system or playing a style that you want to see us operate in every single week. It was very combative, it was very industrious, and I don't expect to see Arsenal play in that way for the majority of the course of this season. So I do think that it will be a boost, but I don't necessarily think that it's going to add a swagger necessarily just because we beat Man City. I think Arteta is very grounded in that sense. I think he will certainly be trying to keep the hype, if you like, as down as feasibly possible. He likes just taking things at a game at a time. But hopefully it does give a boost to this team and more of a self-belief that we can go to places like Anfield maybe and Old Trafford and come away with 3 points after beating Manchester City in the way that we did. Guns and Yellow Ribbons, thank you so much for tuning in. Says Smith Rowe linked to a move to Newcastle in January. Would you let him go or try to keep him? It would depend upon the finances involved, but if someone offered 40 to 50 million pounds for Smith Rowe, maybe upwards of 50 million pounds, it'd be very difficult to say no to, considering that he's a player that Mikel Arteta is not necessarily using all that much. And because he's not using him all that much, he's becomes a little bit of a space filler on the bench. And that's really harsh, but that is the reality of the situation. If you're not being used by your coach, can you justify keeping that amount of money on the bench and taking up a space which could be invested in another player that is used by the coach? I'm not sure you can justify that. So it depends upon the money involved, and it depends upon how Arsenal would replace him. But I'm not entirely against the idea of Smith Rowe leaving, because we need to do what's right for the club. And if Mikel Arteta believes that Smith Rowe is not and doesn't have a integral future here because of the lack of opportunities he's ultimately getting, then it would be the right thing to do to make a decision about his future as well. Dow says, sadly, all my friends are Chelsea fans and I've been getting quite a bit of banter about their recent form. Should I be nervous about Arsenal going to the Bridge? You should be nervous about any Arsenal game. There's always an element of trepidation about each fixture. I'm not sure how you can be getting any kind of banter from Chelsea fans at the moment, to be honest. It's not been the best of years for Chelsea right now. Yes, they picked up a bit of form. They beat Fulham. They beat Luton earlier this season, and most recently they got a win over, I think, another team quite far down the table. So it's difficult to see why you should be getting, as an Arsenal fan, much banter from Chelsea fans. What I would say is that obviously going to Stamford Bridge has been a very good place for Arsenal in the last few years. We've got quite a few good wins, but it's always difficult. It's always a derby. It's always going to generate that much nervousness. And we dominated the game at Stamford Bridge last year. We only won 1-0. But the territory, the dominance of possession, the chance creation, it's a really strong performance. Yeah, it's difficult to understand why you should be getting too much banter from Chelsea fans at the moment, to be fair. Jürgen says, why keep players if we're not going to use them? And that's exactly the point. And if you're not going to use Smith Rowe, you've just got a financial asset on the bench that you're not using, and you may as well look to replace with a player that you are going to use. That is ultimately where we sit on that one. Blackshine says, it's not fair to Smith Rowe to have him warm the bench, let that talent go and play football. Absolutely. Viraj says, Smith Rowe will have a lot of games this season. I'm certain he will participate in all cup competition and find his feet again. He might get minutes in the League Cup, in the FA Cup, in the Champions League. But to be honest, he's a player that should be starting for a team toward the top end of the Premier League. And if that's not happening at Arsenal, for the benefit of his own career, he should probably seek that minute somewhere else. Vegas Gunners, thank you so much for the kind donation. Says, hey Tom, I think we need to keep. I think we need another midfielder for depth. Any other names that you can think of other than Yusuf Fofana? It's a fair question. It's always good to look within, I think, the Premier League sometimes to see the opportunities that are available, to see what players are doing relatively well. We've seen players like Alexis McAllister do really well at Brighton and move on to Liverpool, and it's not necessarily been as smooth sailing. You could say the same thing for Caicedo. He's looked really good at points, but he's also had some difficult displays as well. And then you look to the continent. Maybe we need to bring some experience in, because we could be losing Jorginho. We could be losing Thomas Partey. I've talked about Mikel Moreno at Real Sociedad a few times. He's been captain there. He's a Spanish international. very good player. But you could also say that there's an opportunity and a pathway for someone like Miles Lewis-Skelly. Maybe we should look to bring through and give him the opportunity, or Ethan Nwaneri, who is an attacking midfielder that could play in one of those attacking 8 positions. So maybe we should look within, and that's what we should be doing. David says, how's Flo doing? He's doing all right. Yeah, he's got, I think, 3 goals in 5 games. I don't know if any of them are penalties. I know he's missed a couple of penalties for Monaco, but we want him to do well because we want him to activate as many of those add-ons as feasibly possible. We want him to do well because we quite like a team to come in and buy him, and then Arsenal will get a very good sell-on clause as well. I think between 10 and 20% of that deal will go back to Arsenal of any future signing. So if it's 10% and it's a £50 million deal, we get another £5 million. If it's 20%, we get another £10 million. So, we want him to do well. He's doing all right, but he's certainly not like pulled up trees in the sense of there's any regret coming from Arsenal of letting him go. Jabu says Amadou Onana, of course, the Everton midfielder, is a top player, underrated as well. Maybe he's someone that Arsenal would go to because he's, again, somebody that Arsenal have been linked with when he was at Lille. Maybe Arsenal will return for someone like him. Rich says, I would be very happy to see the Inter midfielder Lucien Agume at Arsenal. Can't say I know too much about him, mate, I'm afraid. So, but haven't seen too much Serie A football in the last couple of years. But maybe Rich rates him, so we'll have to have a look. Grantley Poo says, any news on how Saka's doing? He's just back at London Colney, working on his rehab, working on getting back to full fitness, and hopefully for Chelsea, we won't get an update on that until Mikel Arteta's press conference next week. I think what we've learned from this situation regarding, the reporting of injuries is that, the club do not like information about injuries getting out publicly. It really is something they try to keep as in-house as possible. And I think the last couple of weeks have told us that we need to take things with a bit of a pinch of salt. Arsenal have deceived with the way in which they've used Saka in promotional footage, in the fact that they took him to the team hotel and that they led us into a full sense of security, and certainly convinced a few reporters that it was safe to report things like he'll be in contention to start. So, certainly that they are the way they're handling that. It's very difficult, Grantley, to get kind of any specific and accurate, detailed knowledge of this injury situation because Arsenal like to keep it very, very quiet indeed. Dow says, I'm from Minnesota and I'm planning to come to London to watch a game. What's the best way to get tickets as an American? Always try and go through your supporters club, go through the Arsenal America and inquire with them about potentially getting tickets for a game. You can look on the ticket exchange if you're a member, but you will have to be a member of Arsenal to buy tickets. I can't recommend any unofficial routes to you, unfortunately, because there's always a risk that comes with buying tickets unofficially. And there's plenty of horror stories of people getting scammed. For instance, when I was in Lens last week, when I got to the hotel, there was a group of 4 Arsenal fans that have made the trip that were staying in the same hotel as me. And I was speaking to them about potentially, how they were getting to the stadium. And then I got a phone call up to my room about 10 minutes after I'd arrived. And the guy that I'd been speaking to said, I don't suppose you know anybody that's got tickets because the guy that was giving us ours has just let us down. And you don't want to be in that situation when you've come all the way to another country to watch a game and then you're let down by somebody that you've unofficially bought tickets from. So don't put yourself in that position. Always go through the official channels. You may or may not get lucky. It's really difficult to get tickets because the demand for tickets is simply just so high. It's not, yes, the system could be better. Yes, it could be fairer. But at the same time, people do need to have to accept there is more people that want tickets than there are tickets available, and therefore you are going to find yourself getting very disappointed on a regular occasion. That is just the reality of it. It's why I lack a little bit of empathy when people are saying, this is ridiculous. I've applied 5, 6, 7 times and still not got tickets. That's because the chances of you getting tickets are about less than 5%. When you apply, there's like a less than 5% chance for red members that you might get a ticket. It's a very similar percentage for silver members as well. So just because you have a membership doesn't mean you're going to get one. The chance of you getting a ticket is very low because the demand for those tickets is exceptionally high. So, it's difficult to not turn around to people and say, I'm sorry, but it's not necessarily unfair because the demand is just so big. What I would say is that I think they could do it where, like, if you get a ticket, there's like a cool down period. So then you don't get to apply for tickets for the next 2, 3, 4 games to give somebody else a chance of going. I think that's probably the best way to do it. And at the moment, they don't have that. But there is a lot being done to try and improve that system and make it fairer, whilst also tackling ticket touting, which is still a problem. Every time I walk to the Emirates this season, there's always somebody asking me if I want tickets. It's just what happens. Toney says, would you prefer winning the league and crashing out of the Champions League group stage, or winning the Champions League and finishing 5th? I'd rather win the league. Win the Premier League all day long. I was asked this yesterday. I think Premier League is bigger and harder to win than the Champions League, so I'd much rather win that. Anza says, Tom, if money or willingness weren't an issue, would you rather Neto in the winter or Xavi Simons in the summer? I think Neto fits into things far easier than Xavi Simons does. Xavi Simons' best position, in my opinion, is probably where Odegaard is playing right now, whereas Neto can play in multiple areas of the field, and I think will offer us the depth that we need in that right wing role to Saka and bring competition and change to the team as well. So Neto would be the choice for me in January. I think Neto would be the choice for me out of the two in general, answer, to be honest. John says, if fit, Partey and Rice against Chelsea, without a doubt, I think both of them should start that game in midfield and should certainly be helping us out. Legend says, what about Eberechi Eze? Fantastic player. Really would like to see him at Arsenal if the opportunity ever came up to try and sign a player of that quality. I think he's excellent and can play in multiple attacking positions as well. Right, we are going to end the show there. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. It is very much appreciated. Drop a like on the video. Subscribe if you're new. I hope that the internet has held up fine and that you've been able to see and hear me correctly. But I'll be back tomorrow morning bringing you all the latest news in the past 24 hours. Hopefully we get a bit more than we did today. But thank you for listening. Have a great day. And as always, up the Arsenal.